Morning. Take one. I'm here to discuss a very sensitive subject. The subject would be slavery. Let's first understand that slavery, the definition itself. Slavery is to force an individual or individuals to do something against their will. To clarify that, we must not confuse that with things such as punishment and or training rules, i.e., it's not slavery to be in the military and have the right not to follow orders. It's not slavery to violate the laws of the land. You can't go around and be a mass murderer. You should be punished for that. So let's separate those. The perspective that I would like to talk about is the misconception that slavery is a primary black and or people of color situation, which is far from the truth. It has just happened to be a fact that everyone would know about the culture of where they're from versus others. For example, from the early 1400s to the late 1600s, the primary method of transportation was by boats. However, to power those boats required two things: sails and oars. There was no one hired for oars. How did that work? Worked like this. Primarily document in both the European culture as well as the Asian culture. Villages was raided and conquered. Those villagers that was raided was then put in chain, put on ships and chained to an oar and forced to spend the rest of their natural life powering the boat. To include warships, which means that if the warship was damaged or destroyed, those on board went down with the ship. Slavery. And by the way, on ships, which will become very important at a later stage when we incorporate this versus the word of the Bible. Slavery is also highly noted and duly noted, and matter of fact still exists in the Asian culture. For example, Nanjing, which the entire country was enslaved by the Japanese. This is an area of the Chinese. The Japanese is also on record for enslaving millions of Koreans. In fact, they have a culture similar to ours, African American. For one of the things that most African Americans consider uniquely African American is chitlins and collard greens. So one of the things that you'll notice when it comes to people that's enslaved, they create their own delicacy, which the rest of us would think that is ew, repulsive. In Korea, when they was enslaved, In order to make sure they survived the tough winters and the work they had to do to build a Great China Wall, which extended across the entire country of China, they would take vegetables, primarily cabbage and a little rice, and they would put it in jars. I don't think they had jars in time, but they would wrap it up, dig holes, put it in holes. So at the end of the winter, when they didn't have anything to eat, and the people that was controlling them wouldn't feed them, they would dig it up and eat it. That substance was cabbage. Don't know if you ever had the privilege to smell rotten cabbage, but it stinks very bad. They still eat that today. They still eat that today. So they've been enslaved. Other examples of slavery is in the early days, and don't get me wrong, I think it was the king is eluding me, the name is eluding me, however, it's an English king that basically enslaved. You're going to hear England a lot when it comes to slavery, so I don't back up England. They enslaved a lot of people, not just African American. Footnote. But back to my point. They enslaved the Scottish people, which, by the way, it still is not free today. They cut loose the African American, but they have not cut loose the Scottish. The Scottish is still slaves of the great nation of England, shall we say. Also, plenty of Soviet countries that they're enslaved. They took over places. In fact, talk about slavery. What they would do is they would make you get on the front line, and they would point machine guns at you, or before the invention of guns, spears. And they would have their captures attack the enemy. If you turned around and run, then they would kill you. I think my point is, I somehow believe that we are lost in the pretense that we are the only ones that have been enslaved. Even today, slavery still exists. I don't think it's even been 20 years since South Africa was totally free. In China, you can still sell your daughter legally. You can sell them as indentured servants, and for worse. In the continent of Africa today, it is still a practice. Notice the trend here, to sell young women. So overall, slavery is not a unique African American perspective. The question is, where do we go from here? Dark passes hunt all of us. On every continent, it's a dark path. Consider this. Almost 75 years later, the Germans have to live with the stigma of Hitler. The Japanese, I'm sorry, yes, I'm not. the Japanese have to live with the destruction, terror, and enslavement of billions of people in 1940s. Interesting. Lithuania. Oh yeah. Nobody talk about that one. That's in the USSR. Wow. Brutal. Brutal. Absolutely brutal. I say that to say this. I will not return, and not advocating that it's okay for slavery. But one thing we have to remember about history, it was yesterday. And the one thing that we do not have the ability to do is to change yesterday. The question is not about yesterday, but what do we do about tomorrow? Okay? The world has now have become global. And those who want to be separatists from global will be left behind. As the population gets larger, resources become smaller. Which means that there is no turning back to living off the land. It is too late. Slavery. Let's get it together. Ships on slavery. Again, all the great conquests started with people on ships. Slaves power those ships. Slaves and winds. No slaves was not from Africa. Those slaves were from mostly Europe, Asia. Came to different nations by ship because there was the engine that powered those ships. Yes, we're real well documented. Well documented. So let's not become separatists because our flight has been different than anyone else's flight. People that have served the same brutal, destructive, unhumanitarian circumstances that we have. Thank you.